We defined pro-social behavior as any action that is performed for the benefit of another person. Altruism takes this a step further and argues that in order to be defined as altruism, the act must be motivated solely by the desire to help another person. That there can't also be an element of the ego involved, that the individual performing this act is not in any way motivated by the benefits that may result for the self, that there can be absolutely no ego involved, and that the sole purpose of the action is to benefit another person. And in fact, the individual performing the act may experience a cost as a result of performing this action. And so it's pretty heatedly debated whether altruism even exists. So some argue that there are no true acts of altruism, that there's always that element of the ego involved, that there's always some benefit to the helper as a result of their action, even if it's just kind of feeling good about what they just did, or feeling good about the self, or a boost in self-esteem. And so we won't talk too much about this debate as to whether altruism exists or not, and instead focus on what is called the empathy altruism hypothesis. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. First off, it's important to understand, well, what do we mean by empathy? And we're really going to focus on social emotions versus emotions that are more directed towards the self. So what is the focus of our emotional experience? Is the focus on someone else, or is the focus on the self? When we look at other focused emotions, we can look at sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is a little bit more broad. It's just feelings of concern for another person. So in the face of someone else's distress, do I feel sympathy? Do I feel kind of this general concern about them and their well-being? Empathy goes a step further, in which not only do I feel concern for them, but I also understand that other person's inner emotional experience. And I can put myself in their place, and I'm feeling what they are feeling. So I accurately can identify whether this person, in the midst of their distress, whether they're feeling angry or sad or depressed or whatever it may be. I can correctly identify that, and I can essentially share in that emotion with them. So I am feeling what they are feeling. We can measure actually individual differences in empathy with things like this, like the empathy scale. I really like some of these. These are just example items. So I like to watch other people open presents. I become very involved when I watch a movie. So you may think about whether these items describe you or not. But rather than focusing on individual differences in empathy, what we'll focus on are situational variables that may predict the likelihood that an individual would feel empathy for a person who is experiencing distress. And we're focusing on this other focused emotion versus the self-focused emotion. So a self-focused emotion would be something like personal distress. So in the face of another person's distress, pain, discomfort, right, I'm witnessing another person in need. And rather than focusing on them and my concern for them, I'm focused on the self and my own distress. So I feel anxious or uncomfortable in this particular situation, right? So the emotion is focused on how this other person's distress is making me feel anxious and uncomfortable in this particular setting. So we can distinguish between these two different types of emotion, the self-focused versus the other focus, the empathy. right? And we can distinguish here, we can predict the likelihood of helping depending upon the emotion that the person is experiencing when witnessing another person in need of help. When we look at other focused emotions, something like empathy, it seems to increase the likelihood of helping across situations. When we look at a self-focused emotion, something like personal distress, this predicts helping only when helping is the easiest way out. So we kind of see a difference in goals. When our emotions are focused on the other, and we're concerned about them, our goal is to help, to relieve their distress. When emotions are focused towards the self, and I'm just thinking about how anxious and uncomfortable I feel because of your distress, then my goal is to relieve my own distress, not necessarily yours. So if by relieving your distress, if that's the easiest option to make myself feel better, then I'll do that. But if there's an easier way out of this situation that would allow me to reduce my own discomfort and anxiety, then I may pick that easier option, right? And for instance, just exit the situation. You're really upset. You're in need of some kind of help that's making me feel anxious. I'm just going to walk away, right? And let you deal with it, because it would be too much time and effort and trouble to assist you. And all I really care about is making myself feel better. And so I can easily just exit the situation, right? So we can look at this empathy altruism hypothesis, right, as a prediction of when is someone likely to help. Right? And if the person experiences empathy, they are more likely to help, even if the situation is easily escapable, right? So because their motivation is different, it's altruistic rather than egoistic, focused on the self. And we see this with our classic study of Carol. So this is the case of Carol. This study has a pretty elaborate cover story. So participants were led to believe that the researchers were interested in students' evaluations of potential human interest stories that may be aired on the university radio station. And so participants were told that their task for the day was to listen to this radio segment that was a human interest piece and to evaluate how interesting it was and whether they should air it on the university radio station. So all of our participants received the case of Carol. And Carol's story was that she was a student at the university who had recently been involved in a very severe car accident in which she had very severe injuries that placed her in the emergency room and in the hospital for an extended period of time. And Carol is discussing some of the difficulties that have resulted in her extended hospital stay, particularly the difficulties that she's had in keeping up with her classes. And so prior to listening to Carol's story, we have the manipulation of empathy. And so participants are randomly assigned to either the empathy or the non-empathy conditions. Or here we'll say the high empathy versus the low empathy conditions. Those in the high empathy conditions are told that this is a human interest piece. In order to effectively evaluate it, you should put yourself in Carol's shoes and really imagine things from her perspective. Right? Try to get in her head. So they're manipulating empathy, right? Try to think about things from her perspective, get emotionally involved in this story in order to evaluate it. Versus those who were randomly assigned to the low empathy condition, they are told, your goal here today is to evaluate this segment. In order to do that effectively, we need you to remain impartial. Right? You need to distance yourself Yes, this is a very emotional story, but don't get emotionally involved, right? Don't get wrapped up in Carol's emotional state, right? Remain detached and objective. So here, they're explicitly instructed to not engage in empathy. So after listening to Carol's story, after receiving one of these two types of instructions, participants are approached by the researcher, and they are told that Carol's professor knew that somebody would be listening to Carol's tape. You happen to be the person who was randomly assigned to listen to Carol's tape. And because of that, the professor has asked us to deliver this letter to you. So you open up the letter that says, hey, as a psychology student participating in research, you share a class with Carol. You are taking psychology, which is the same class that she is enrolled in. And as you heard in the video, she is experiencing some difficulties as a result of her injuries in her hospital stay. And I would like to ask you to help out Carol by lending her your notes. And at this point, this is where we have the second manipulation, which was how easily can our participant escape this situation? So in one condition, after reading all of this, the letter ends with, due to Carol's extensive injuries, she will not be returning to class for the remainder of the semester. And so this participant reads this and realizes, hey, I'll never see Carol again. So it'd be real easy for them to say no, fold up the letter, walk away, right? Never think about this again. Versus in our other condition, the letter ends with, Carol is making some recovery. She's getting a lot better, and we expect that she will return to class very soon. And so this student will read this and think, okay, right, if I say no, I am going to have to see Carol every day in class. And, you know, maybe she'll come in with her cast or bandages on crutches, and I'm going to have to look at her and be kind of faced with this knowledge that she asked for help and I rejected that request, right? I didn't help her out. And so this is our manipulation of how easily one could escape the situation. And so what our researchers found was that in the high empathy condition, those who are told to put themselves in Carol's shoes, to imagine things from her perspective, that those students, it didn't matter whether they were led to believe that they would see Carol again or not, that even in the easily escapable situation, they said, yes, I will help Carol out and I will lend her my notes. And so this is exactly what the theory would predict, that the motivation was to help out Carol. And so it didn't matter that they could easily escape the situation because it wasn't about them, right? It wasn't about their ego. It was about Carol and what she needed, right? Versus in the low empathy condition, researchers only saw high rates of helping when the situation was inescapable, when helping was the easiest thing to make the self feel better. Right? I need to reduce my own distress. This is causing me discomfort, thinking about Carol's situation. And in this condition, I would have to see her every day, and so it'd be easier just to help her out and lend her my notes. Versus in the easily escapable condition, they won't see Carol again. It's very easy for them to just walk away and wash their hands of the whole situation. And so we see here low rates of helping in this particular condition. So it's only in a low empathy, easily escapable situation that we see very low rates of helping, which is exactly what we would expect from this particular theory. And so I always think of of what is, a personal example of this. Many of us would like to think, well, I'm a high empathy person, I'm a good person. This model can't explain my behavior. I know for me personally, when I think about this theory and how it applies to my own actions, this is what I think of. And so I will warn you, this is distressing, but that's kind of the point. So hopefully this plays for you guys. And it may be something that you find familiar.
How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
And so many of us have seen these advertisements, and of course it's distressing, right? We don't enjoy seeing these types of images. They make us feel bad, but based on our actions, our actions suggest that what we're experiencing is personal distress. Right? That I am focused on the anxiety and discomfort that I feel when watching this, because what do most of us do? Do we do the difficult thing, which is picking up the phone and calling the ASPCA and donating money? Or do we take the easy escape? Do we change the channel, right? To remove these types of images from our view, and that makes us feel better, and then we're done with it, right? So maybe you're like me, maybe you're not. This is just kind of what I think about when I think, does the empathy altruism hypothesis apply to my own helping behavior? And in that particular situation, it seems like it does.